I am most frequently asked, what do you do? The answer is I help people change their circumstances. I realize that isn't very specific. It's impossible to say what that means to you, what that might mean to you. It means something different for every person I work with. Each circumstance is completely different. As a consultant, I am my experience. And whatever value there is in my work comes from that. It comes from my experience. It comes from embracing change and living and being able to pass on what I have learned. One of the main things I've learned is the first thing you need to do is find a place to start, which seems obvious, but it's often just simply overlooked. I've also learned if you have a sense of humor, some self-awareness, and a bit of courage, you have everything you need to find your way. I think that most people, if they're not just motivated simply by curiosity, what they're asking is, what's the risk? What's the risk? The risk is you may have to try something else if what you're trying doesn't work out. Anytime you make a significant change, something is learned. That's absolute. You will be more than you were. The greater risk is in doing nothing. There's far greater risk in doing nothing. I think the best way to answer the original question, what do you do, is to use an example from my own experience of going through this process to discover where I wanted to be and how it enabled me to find a starting place. There are 5 questions that I use. When answering these questions, you gain insight into where you are and where you want to be. It's just doing the work more than anything. The questions are, where are you? What are you doing? What can you do? What do you want to do? And where do you want to be? By the time you get to the 5th one, if you've done your work on the first 4, you probably have a pretty good idea of the answer. You will know. Now you've ascertained where you want to be, you can figure out a plan to get there. It's not a magic trick. What it does is allow you to take control, to as great an extent as possible, of change. It lets you make decisions about what happens next. I had built and operated a cafe with a partner. It was an incredible learning experience, at times joyful and full of interesting encounters, at other times trying and painful. So, life. Eventually it ran its course for me for a multitude of reasons. Starting the cafe itself had been the result of assessing my possibilities using this same technique. This gave me the confidence to know that I could find a new way. Some of these questions are deeply personal. Answering them honestly is essential. Sharing what you discover is not. The whole point of this is to know yourself. The more you know yourself, the more informed your decisions are, the more likely it is that you get to where you should be. These are the questions within the questions that I use, the ones that I have found to be most useful. Where you find yourself will heavily influence a decision. It may be somewhere you have to get away from. It may be that you love where you are, but other things need to change. It's the first thing to consider. I'm only putting in 1 or 2 short answers right now. They would all be considered by you in much more depth. Where are you physically, both how you feel and where you live? For me in this case, I was physically healthy, stressed, in transition. How do you feel about yourself? I was disappointed with the outcome of the previous venture, the cafe, but determined to make changes. Optimism from pessimism, I suppose. Are your relationships what you want them to be? In this case, I was single, so negatively impacting somebody else's immediate existence wasn't a concern. Your circumstances may be entirely different. If you're in a relationship, maybe you're assessing that relationship, or maybe it's a strong relationship, in which case you'll be doing this work not alone. You'll be working your way through this with somebody else in mind. It's 2 different things, but neither takes away from the fact that you need to make a decision. Did you get where you are now by design or by accident? The intention of this isn't to devolve into self-flagellation. So it's not some version of looking in the mirror and telling yourself how bad everything is. That's not the point of this. The point of this is an open and honest consideration of how you came to be where you are. And was it by accident or by design? And usually it's a bit of both, isn't it? In my case, it was important for me to know that I had done my best, so that's part of how I got there, by doing my best. It just didn't work out. I also made mistakes along the way. Definitely made mistakes, and so it was important to consider those and to try not to make them again in the future. Huge part of learning, isn't it? What feels right? This is just an assessment of what feels right, just looking at things that feel right about life. Again, it's an honest assessment of yourself. That's what this whole process is based on. Essentially, is just an honest assessment of yourself. That's what will get you where you need to be, being honest about all of these things to yourself. It's a very personal thing, isn't it? Making a decision to make a change, a big change in your life, is very personal. And knowing that a change is necessary, that's what felt most right to me. What feels wrong? In this case, for me, what felt most wrong was that it felt like I was doing the same thing that I had done before. It's like that old saying, isn't it? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over and hoping for a different result. And I think there's a great deal of truth in that. And that's what felt wrong. It just felt like I was doing the same thing, hoping for a different result. Do you belong where you are? For me, this one was easy to answer because it was clear that I was somewhere I didn't want to be. It made change not only inevitable, but an imperative. It's not going to be that way for all of you. Sometimes you belong where you are. You might not be trying to get somewhere else. So your process will be different. You'll be looking at a different conclusion. It could be a job. It could be a relationship that you're deciding about. It could be 1,000 different things. That's what you will discover. What are you doing? In many ways, this is the critical question. This is the real self-assessment. Do you sleep well? I go through this in the order that I think they're most important, and for me, sleep is critical. Everything is fueled by sleep. If you're not sleeping well, you need to be assessing that in whatever manner is necessary. And in this case, for me, sleep was okay. Are you comfortable with the exercise you get? This has varying degrees of importance to people. For some people, it's huge. For other people, it's of little or no importance. For me, it's pretty important. As long as I'm doing something physical, then I feel like I'm in a good place. Do you eat enough good food? Especially at this period of time, I was at garbage disposal, so it wasn't particularly anything that I wanted to be bragging about, but it wasn't tragic either. What habits have you developed, good and bad? Like everyone, some were good, some were bad. Again, it's a personal thing. You assess the ones that are good, and you need to reinforce them and keep going with them. You try to remove the ones that are simply wasting a lot of time or energy on foolishness. And then the bad habits, for me, it's just assessing how much of a detriment the bad habits are to what you want to do and what you're doing. This is an ongoing thing, isn't it? Deciding, are the things you're doing useful or useless? What work are you doing, paid and unpaid? It's an important, not necessarily distinction, but it's important to include in your assessment the work that you do that isn't paid too, because often that might be the most telling. The work you're doing for free is often the things that you really want to be doing. I was definitely just marking time. Work was neither a source of inspiration nor an impediment. Sometimes you just find yourself doing something because something needs to be done. What are you doing to feel good? Perhaps this is more of an assessment of what you could call pleasure, and is it a positive or a negative in your life? It's probably the most personal question here. It's the one that is most revealing about yourself in some ways. What do you do that makes you feel good? Are you learning anything new? For me, I'm always trying to learn something new. Change plays such a profound role in our lives that I can't see any other way. Something new is always occurring. Do you have hobbies? I like to write. I really enjoyed talking to people. Being part of the cafe was the best part of it, really, was the conversations. What do you use for distractions? Music, getting together with friends. Do you think you are growing? I didn't feel like I was growing. I felt like I was accumulating more understandings, but I wasn't really growing in any way. How is your attitude? I think I touched on it earlier. It was pessimistically optimistic. Again, I have gone through this before, so I was confident that I would be able to find my way to somewhere. What aren't you doing? I wasn't moving forward. You can see that at some places in your life, the answers start to become obvious quickly. For me, in this case, I knew that I needed to do something else. It occurs to me that going through this process becomes second nature. It's sort of a gentle, ongoing background assessment of who you are. It makes your ability to embrace the inevitable changes with much more confidence. It doesn't make them less powerful. It just makes you more prepared. What can you do? This one's key. An honest assessment of what you can do. Not what you think you can do or what you wish you could do, but what you can really do. What things do you know? You need to assess what kind of knowledge you have. What things do you know? Most important is what you know about yourself. More than anything, you need to know what you know, not the things you think you know or would like to know. I break this question up into 5 categories, but it's really one. I just find it helpful to narrow the focus when considering this question. Change usually means needing to employ seldom used talents or requires an openness to learn new skills. The more specifically you're aware of what you can and can't do, the more likely you are to make decisions that lead to where you want to be. What things do you know? What are the things that you can actually look at and say, okay, this is something I'm adept at? What abilities have you developed confidence in? It's not so much, can you juggle 4 balls at once while you whistle orchestral music? What are the things that you can do that are beneficial in any kind of a life scenario? But if you've always wanted to be a clown in an orchestra, then you can definitely include that. What do you really like to do? I like seeing things change. I like watching change. I like challenges, music. What are your strengths? I'm pretty adaptable and I'm good at helping. What can't you do? I have a hard time accepting nonsense or things that I consider to be nonsense. And that's actually very much a weakness at times as well, which also needs to be considered. I don't like the term weakness because we all have 1,000 things we can't do. They aren't weaknesses unless you put yourself in a position where your inability becomes a liability. Knowing what you can't do is critical to knowing yourself. It may be the hardest question to be honest about. I think it's also the most important one to understand. What do you want to do? How did you answer this question as a child? When I was a kid, I wanted to have adventures. Like lots of us, we want to have adventures. But the idea never really left me. How have you answered it along the way? I wanted to live in other countries, so I wanted to experience other things. I came from that kind of a background. My mother was born and raised in another country and an adventurer. She lived in different countries and tried different things, and I always thought that was a spectacular way to be. What have you imagined doing? I've always imagined living a life where I'm learning new things. Again, here you can see themes revealing themselves. This is why you go through the process. Start to get a better idea of you. You start to get a pretty strong idea of what matters to you, and from that, what the possibilities may be. What may be possible? I had a background in building things. I could run a business. What would be your ideal? Somewhere new and collaboration, helping people. What don't you want to do? I just didn't want to be where I was. Sometimes it's simple and sometimes it's complicated. It always just comes down to understanding yourself. Where do you want to be? Physically, health and home. I feel like everybody wants to be physically healthy, so that's pretty easily answered. It will depend on your circumstances too. Maybe you have something small that you're trying to achieve physically, or maybe you have something huge that you're trying to achieve physically. That will be a part of where you want to be. As far as where you live, you may be completely happy where you are and maybe exactly where you need to be as far as occupying space on the planet. Or it may be somewhere else, like it was for me, somewhere that felt like it had new possibilities. What do you need to see there? I imagine mountains and oceans like a lot of us do. What really matters? At the time for me, what really mattered was trying something new. Do you know where to begin? The consideration here is, where do you want to end up? For me, I wanted to be patient and prepared, waiting for opportunity. That is where I wanted to begin. I just knew that I had to be patient and that I was ready for whatever might present itself. For you, most likely it will be different. You may have a specific goal that has emerged or that you knew all along, but now have the understandings needed to pursue it. Whatever it is, by this point, you'll know where to begin. You'll know where you want to be. And then you can start working backwards from there to your starting point. Who do you want to be? That's for you to answer. Because you get to decide. You get to decide who you are, and you get to decide who you want to be. Maybe you make it, maybe you don't. But if you aren't there yet, you can decide to try to find a way. All right, here's my story of how it worked out for me. And as it turned out, a friend wanted me to bring her cat to her on Little Cayman, the smallest of the 3 Cayman Islands. This had the makings of the opportunity that I was waiting for. Ocean and an island in the Caribbean. Can't get much more open than that. I discussed with her the possibilities for work and living. There was a local bar, restaurant, and houses were being built. So right away I know there's 2 things that potentially I could be involved in. Nothing is a sure thing, and this was especially sketchy, but it had the things I was looking for and was an ideal starting point. I got the necessary papers for the cat and myself and began the adventure. I knew I was going there to live. I had worked out everything that I needed to know that somewhere else was where I belonged, and this was going to be the first place that I looked at. After a vaguely hair-raising puddle jumper plane ride in a twin prop to the island, a mile wide and 10 miles long, my friend met me at the Grass Strip airport, and I gave her a cat, and she took me to the Hungry Iguana, the restaurant and the bar on the island. The first thing I did, basically, within a couple hours, was start making it known that I wanted to work. I've found that when you're in a situation like this, nobody knows you, so you have to establish yourself as a person. Because I sat down and considered all of these things, I had a pretty good idea of who I am, and I know what I want to do. So I wasn't confused. I haven't just gone at this without any kind of thought. So I had a plan, vague as it was, but I had a plan. And I get work quickly because in situations like this, it's a transitory world. In an island, in a small place like this, people come and go all the time. So employers are always looking for employees that might be useful. The theory being that if they don't need somebody today, they're probably going to need somebody tomorrow. These are the things that I had considered before I got there. And that's how the work I had done comes into play. I knew what was possible before I got there. I knew that with my cafe bar experience that I could fit in that particular enterprise. And so I got a job working there. It's not what I wanted long term, but it got me in the door. It got me started. It's just the beginning. That's the trick, is getting started. Once you get started, one thing will lead to another. There's always a place for you if you're willing to look and be patient and know what you do well. Not even well, just what you can do. And the thing with this kind of experience is that it doesn't end there. I lived on that island for 3 years. It was an amazing experience. I learned so much. I built homes. I became a scuba diving instructor. I learned how a resort worked. I learned to sail. I met so many interesting people that I learned so much from. And all of it was because I was prepared to embrace change. I knew what I could do and couldn't do, and I knew where to start. I was strong in my understanding of what was and wasn't possible for me. And that's the value of doing the work, to better understand yourself, always knowing that there's a place to start, embracing change. And you need to believe in yourself. You need to be a realist. The thing you try might not succeed, but equally it might succeed. So you have to be okay with either outcome, but you definitely have to go into it as prepared as possible to believe that it's something that you can do. As obvious as it sounds, you become who you are by being who you are. I hope that you found value here. I wish for you the greatest success in finding your way.